We think it's always very important, isn't it, to make sure that people have got proper financial advice.
One class of people who often are concerned are parents of young adults.
What would you say to someone who assumes that compensation is a windfall, like a lottery win?
And that's another reason why it's really important to ensure you have a specialist lawyer.
For most people, I think they'd be surprised that the general damages, that is the compensation for the pain and suffering, is usually a relatively small part of an overall award.
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Medical Negligence Matters. Today we're going to be talking about the compensation system, how it works, how compensation is calculated, and what does it really mean. And joining me today is my friend and colleague, Tami Frankel.
Hello,
Tami.
Hi.
So starting out, I suppose the basic is how compensation is calculated. What factors go into working out the financial compensation that somebody receives as a result of injury? So starting with the basics, I guess compensation is really made up of two main things, isn't it? You have what we call general damages, and that is the compensation for the actual physical or psychological injury.
Yeah, the actual injury itself. And I think people are often really disappointed, understandably, at how little that can be. I mean, that's for their, well, we call it rather archaically, pain, suffering and loss of amenity.
Yeah, it's how it's affected one's life, isn't it? I mean, that's it. It's not just, there's the physical injury itself. And I mean, sometimes that's, very obvious, like a loss of a limb or that sort of thing. But very often it can be things like just chronic pain or things that are not so tangible, but are things that really affect a person's life.
The psychological effects sometimes as well of what's happened to them and the changes it's wrought to their lives as well can form part of that.
Yeah, and as you say, I think many people would be surprised and yes, disappointed by the figures that are awarded for that type of injury because, and I suppose we should talk a little bit about, why that is. I mean, I think one of the differences, the system in the UK is that compensation for pain and suffering and for the physical and emotional injury is really set on the basis of previous cases that have been decided in the past, aren't they? And guidelines that are issued by the Judicial Studies Board, which give, I suppose, exactly that, guidance to judges in how to assess the impact of certain injuries.
And to keep it a bit so that it's predictable and it's fair as between claimants as well.
I think that's right. And the guidelines that are published give brackets of compensation, don't they, for certain types of injury. So it might say a particular injury is worth somewhere between £5,000 and £15,000.
Yeah.
And where one falls within that bracket will be governed by, the age of the person who suffered the injury, how it impacts their life. For most people, I think they'd be surprised that the general damages, that is the compensation for the pain and suffering, is usually a relatively small part of an overall award.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the greater part of most people's award is what we would call special damages, isn't it?
Yeah.
And those are made up of what compensation for expenses that have already been incurred or losses that have been incurred, and compensation for any future financial out-of-pocket
expenses or losses.
So what sort of things?
Well, it can be literally anything, which means we have to rely heavily on the client to tell us about the impact. But common things include loss of earnings, the cost of any aids or equipment somebody might have needed, the costs of medical treatment if they've had it privately, or the cost of things such as over-the-counter medications. But then there are also things that are relatively common, but which are more individual. So somebody with a foot or leg injury who finds, for instance, bending or getting dressed difficult might have had to purchase a partial new wardrobe, maybe trousers with stretchy waistbands or slip-on shoes, things like that. it can also include an amount for help that's provided to them free of charge. So not everything has to have a receipt, in that they don't have to have paid out for it.
Yes, that's true, because I suppose for many people, if they are ill or they're injured as a result of a medical accident, a lot of the day-to-day care that is provided during the recovery period isn't care that's paid for. It's care that's provided by family members and friends, sort of, I suppose, out of the goodness of their hearts. But that is something which the law recognises as a compensatable loss.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if people do other things for you, such as your housework, your gardening, and that can go on into the future. Maybe you can never climb ladders again, so you need a window cleaner and someone to do your gardening. If you always used to do that, then that task, and you now have to pay for someone to do that task, then you can claim compensation. You can reclaim the amount that it's costing you to replace that service which you used to provide for yourself.
And so I suppose it might be worth us explaining a little bit about how the compensation is paid. Because in the vast majority of cases, compensation is paid in a lump sum, isn't it?
It's a one-off payment.
Even though the losses that are being compensated are losses that will go over or continue over a certain period of years. We have to do quite sophisticated calculations to sort of work out what those losses represent in current today's value, and the amount of money that the individual needs at this stage to generate
that
enough to cover those expenses in the future. And there's quite a lot of publications which lawyers could use to work out the complicated actuarial and financial background to those calculations. But more commonly, or no, perhaps more frequently these days, certainly in very significant injury cases, it's not just lump sum, is it?
No, in certain cases, in particular if you have a defendant who can make those sort of payments, you'll get what are called periodical payments, which means you'll get money every year for certain elements of the expenses which you are likely to incur in the future. And the idea behind that is to ensure that whatever it is the person's going to need, one of the big things being care into the future, can be provided to them.
I suppose that's true, because I think a lot of clients have or might be very worried that a lump sum that they get now might run out before the injured individual dies, and then what happens about the costs of care. And I think it can be, although it means that the lump sum is smaller, they do then have a guarantee that the money that they receive will never run out, because those periodical payments will continue for as long as the injured individual is alive. And they're also index linked. So
there's a mechanism to make sure that they do keep abreast of inflation, so that they do still, if it's 10 hours care, it still buys 10 hours care rather than being a certain amount of money. Yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose it works both ways, doesn't it? So that the individual who's injured knows that they will always have money coming in as long as they're alive. But also, if for whatever reason that injured individual dies before they were expected to, then the health service isn't overpaying.
Absolutely, someone's not, yes. Because, of course, life expectancy isn't a date that you are going to live until. It's just an average. So, it means
an informed guess, isn't it, really?
But, of course, it doesn't allow for all sorts of things like walking under buses or having new innovations in healthcare which help people who you know sort of might have been expected to live until certain ages to live longer. So it counts for everything.
So the periodical payments, take some of the risk out of the uncertainties that are inherent in that, don't they? Some clients ask me, who is keeping an eye on how the money is spent? And the answer to that in most cases is, well, nobody. And that is quite nerve-wracking for some clients, isn't it, really? I mean, the idea is that you get awarded a lump sum of money, and you can spend it on whatever you like. I mean, we calculate how the figure is reached to begin with by looking at the various losses and this sort of thing, but ultimately a lump sum of money goes to the client.
And it's theirs to spend. I think one class of people who often are concerned are parents of young adults. So an 18 or 19-year-old receiving a large amount of money that's supposed to last them for a very long time, it's very difficult. Their parents get very worried that they're not going to be sensible, that they're going to be subject to outside influences. And you can understand that, but certainly at present, there's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing that can be done.
No, I suppose concerned parents, but we think it's always very important, isn't it, to make sure that people have got proper financial advice. And I think that anybody who is awarded a significant sum of money is well advised to take advice from a specialist in how that money can be best invested. Because clients are anxious to make sure that the losses that they've suffered are things that they can cover for as they get older.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, in appropriate cases, they may put their money into trusts to ensure that it lasts longer and it's spent properly. And in cases where the person will never be able to look after themselves, they will actually have a deputy appointed who will have the money allocated to them, and they will be responsible for making sure that everything that's purchased, all the payments that are made, are reasonable purchases, and to help to make sure that the money lasts for as long as it is required.
Yes, but I suppose people who have full capacity are really entitled to spend the money in any way they choose.
Yeah.
And it's for the individual to make those decisions. I suppose one other thing which some people are concerned about, particularly when the awards of damages are not sufficient to provide for sort of long-term care and that sort of thing. People who are in receipt of means-tested benefits, who then receive compensation for an injury, and the compensation is designed really to compensate just for pain and suffering rather than financial losses.
Yeah.
Sometimes the award of that lump sum can take them outside the eligibility for means-tested benefits. And so it is possible for those individuals to put their money into special trusts.
Trust, yes. Yeah.
Which ring-fences it. So that they can continue to get the benefits that they need to cover their day-to-day expenses. Well, what would you say to someone who assumes that compensation is a windfall, like a lottery win?
That's always really disappointing when people say things like that. And really the only answer is I have never had a client who would do the same again, in that they would swap, that they would happily maintain the injury in order to get the compensation. Every client I've ever had would happily forego the compensation if they could go back to the way things were or should have been. It's not a windfall.
Exactly. I totally agree. And I think that the compensation in the UK is, in the most part, fairly limited. I mean, we all see the headlines about the cases of millions of pounds being awarded, and those cases are really a very, very small proportion of the total. They make the headlines because of the numbers, but they're a very small proportion of the total. And of course, in those cases, those are individuals who are very seriously injured for the rest of their lives and require, for example, 24-hour care, which is expensive. And it is the cost of providing physiotherapy and care and occupational therapy and this sort of thing, which makes up the big numbers.
Which is why they have that huge amount, because they need it in order to be looked after appropriately. Yeah,
the vast majority of cases in this country attract compensation of significantly less than £50,000, which is still a lot of money, but not the headline-grabbing figures.
Not the headline-grabbing figures, and not an amount which you would take in return for that injury. The whole point is that people would always rather be uninjured and not have the money and just have their lives back.
Yeah, and again, the losses, in most cases, the special damages, that's the financial losses, all that is designed to put the patient back in the position they would have been in if the injury hadn't happened. It's not to give the individual an advantage.
No.
It's to put them back where they should have been had the injury not occurred.
No, absolutely. It's like they didn't need care beforehand. They could do their own gardening beforehand, and now they have enough money to allow them to buy it in from somewhere else.
So I suppose to sum up, I mean, for the vast majority of individual claimants in clinical negligence cases, the resolution of their case results in a lump sum payment, which is a one-off, isn't it? And there's no coming back
No,
to
and
ask for more.
No, there's no coming back. It's a final payment. And that's another reason why it's really important to ensure you have a specialist lawyer who will know exactly how to ensure that every aspect of your losses are covered and accounted for, and that you recover compensation for them.
And that can direct you to the right places to get advice about investment, so that you can make sure that
Absolutely.
you can make that money last for as long as you need it to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although ultimately the responsibility is on the individual.
It is, and adults are adults. There's only so much you can do. You explain to them what the money represents and what it's for. They have seen all the evidence. They know what's been calculated. They know what they need for the future. But if somebody decides that's not what they want, that's their choice.
Absolutely. So I hope we've helped people to understand a little bit about what compensation really means, how it's calculated, and what happens with it after the case is finished, and lots of questions. But thank you, Tami, for helping to answer some of those today.
Thank you.